Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Adargave Lazi, and coming up in today's newscast. The Israel Defense Forces met with gunfire as they carry out the planned demolition of the home of the Palestinian terrorist who killed 5 people in Bnei Brak. A stormy night in the Israeli Knesset. The enemy flag bill, which outlaws enemy flags on universities and state-funded institutions, passes a preliminary reading. And a delegation of ambassadors to the United Nations caps off a week-long visit to Israel by learning about Israeli tech innovation. Israeli Defense Forces entered the village of Yabad near Jenin overnight to demolish the home of a Palestinian terrorist. Saf Nissan with the report.
The Israel Defense Forces entered the village of Yabad overnight Wednesday to carry out the planned demolition of the house of the Palestinian terrorist Dia Hamarsha, who was responsible for murdering 5 people in the ultra-Orthodox city of Bnei Brak earlier this year. According to the IDF, during the demolition operation, violent riots broke out, in which hundreds of Palestinians threw stones, set fires to tires, and threw Molotov cocktails and explosives at the IDF. Armed Palestinian gunmen also opened fire on the soldiers who responded by returning fire. No IDF soldiers were killed. But the Palestinian Health Ministry announced that at least 1 Palestinian was killed in the exchange and others injured. The IDF conducted the operation after the High Court of Justice rejected a petition from the terrorist family over the planned demolition of their home. The IDF said that during the operation, forces arrested the father of the terrorist, who was taken in for future questioning.
And now in other news, politics. A very contentious night on Wednesday in the Israeli Knesset as the enemy flags bill passed its initial reading. Kayla Eberlin with the report.
A stormy night Wednesday in the Israeli Knesset as legislation outlawing enemy flags, including that of the Palestinian Authority, from flying on universities and state-funded institutions, passed a preliminary vote. The bill passed by a majority of 63 in favor versus 16 opposed, with Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar from the coalition voting in favor along with the opposition, while coalition Meretz and Ram Party members all opposed the bill. During the discussion on the bill prior to the vote, MK Eli Cohen, who drafted the legislation, engaged in a heated debate with Arab members of Knesset, calling on them to go to Gaza or Jordan.
תתארו לכם שבארצות הברית היו מניפים את דגלי אל-קאעידה. תארו לכם שבבריטניה בבתי חולים היו מניפים את דגלי ה-IRA.
חבר הכנסת אבו שחאדה, קריאה ראשונה.
חכה, לך לעזה, לך לעזה חביבי, לך לעזה או לירדן.
Hours earlier, another heated debate took place over the Bereaved Brothers Bill, which seeks to regulate the status of bereaved siblings and grant them rights and recognition. The bill passed by a vote of 72 in favor and no opposition, but not before a yelling match developed between Arab MK Ahmed Tibi, serving as replacement Knesset chairman, and several right-wing members of Knesset who were removed from the plenum after calling Tibi a terrorist.
את חברה בסיעה היחידה שיש בה מורשע בתמיכה בטרור. תודה רבה.
And with more on the events at the Knesset and the political situation in Israel is Gil Hoffman, the political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure being with you, Lidar.
So, first of all, the events of last night at the Knesset, scenes of insults and yelling. I mean, what do you make of this? Is this a reflection of the state of the current coalition in Knesset?
Well, there is definitely chaos right now, where both the coalition and the opposition are very divided, and there have been plenty of bills that have brought out the most heated tones possible. It's gotten a lot harder to govern lately, unfortunately.
And regarding the enemy flag bill, I mean, we've seen the opposition members criticizing Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, saying that he's, reliant on members of Arab members of Knesset. I mean, there is such division, as you mentioned, but also within the coalition, relying on Mansour Abbas. It was clear Abbas and also Meretz would vote against the bill, but, how much longer can it continue? Can the coalition continue to function like this?
Well, they've been through 4 weeks so far since they came back from their spring recess. They only have another 8 weeks until their summer recess. It's a good job if you can get it, Lidar. They don't work in August. Then they have still Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, the week after Simchat Torah, just in case to take down their sukkah. They don't come back until the end of October. So as hard as it is, as divided as they are, as many tests as there are still going to be over the next 8 weeks, it is still possible. And then if they make it through to the end of July 27th, then it's already impossible to have elections this year. They at best would initiate elections in November. That would happen in March, which would be a great accomplishment for a government that anyway was going to have a turnover in the prime minister's office in next August. So it's not easy, but they can still make it.
So essentially, they have to hold on until July 27th, after which elections would be postponed until next year, is what you're saying.
Right. And meanwhile, sometimes people threaten because they really are trying to leave and help themselves out politically and get the best situation possible for them, whether it's via an election or a different government being formed in the current Knesset. And sometimes people threaten, which Gideon Sa'ar did, to try to make others be more loyal and try to make the current government function better. And it might sound the same, but it's very different. This is an empty threat. Then there are real threats. An empty threat from somebody big like Sa'ar sounds scarier than a real threat from a Rinawi Zoabi from Meretz, but it doesn't make it real.
And yet, I mean, currently this coalition is getting by with 60 seats, but we're constantly hearing about possible defectors to the opposition. You mentioned Gideon Sa'ar, most recently reportedly in talks with the Likud, though he's denied this. I mean, what can you tell us is really going on behind the scenes? And is this the right way to continue moving forward?
Yeah, behind the scenes, it's total chaos. Every man is looking out for himself, for his own political future. They all don't know what's going to happen. There are many members of Knesset who would be destroyed if an election would be held. There are many members of Knesset who would lose everything if a new government would be formed in the current Knesset. And so each one has to be pushing for which way they want. Now, there are 60 members of Knesset who still have an interest in this government staying in power. They, for that to happen, have to push and pull in different directions. And then it's the job of the opposition to throw bills in the way that'll make things harder for the current government to form, to try to exacerbate the differences that there are, the divides within the coalition. And then there are bills like the emergency bill for Judea and Samaria that pass every 5 years automatically, that set into law things that are not controversial in any way in this country, but have to pass, that are impossible to pass with this current government. So we'll see between now and Monday what magic they can pull to keep it all together.
Now, Gil, you've been covering politics for a very long time. You've seen many election cycles. I mean, do you think Israel is going to be heading to new elections soon?
Soon means 2023. I don't think there's going to be this government falling apart next Monday, as some people think, and initiating an election within 90 days that would be held in, I'm not so good at math, being a journalism major, September or something. No, I still don't see that happening. But in 2023, we'll go back and vote again a fifth time since April of 2019. It's not healthy. And the quest for stability in Israel will continue.
All right, well, we'll keep a close eye. Gil Hoffman, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Always a pleasure, Lidar. Thank you.
And now in other news, the White House issued a statement Wednesday saying that the United States was committed to coordinating with Israel on efforts to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, Israel launching a massive drill on Wednesday, sending hundreds of aircraft to bases in Cyprus, simulating striking enemy targets, including in Iran. Joining us now to discuss the latest developments is Professor Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel and Professor for Political Science at both Columbia and Tel Aviv University. Thank you for joining us. So first of all, the talks with Iran have largely stalled. The U.S. National Security Advisor and the Israeli National Security Advisor meeting at the White House to discuss Iran. I mean, what is the significance of this meeting now during this crucial time?
Well, I imagine we're pretty much getting down to the final opportunity for a nuclear deal at this point, at least. And it really increasingly looks like there won't be a deal. So I would imagine, by the way, I should qualify that. Very often negotiations, just when they looked like they're about to come apart, the very worst moment, that's when the breakthrough happens. But it doesn't look like that's the case now. And I would imagine that what Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Khulata are talking about is Plan B. What do we do if there isn't a deal? And Israel, of course, has been pressing the U.S. for a while to reimpose biting sanctions. They're there on the books still since the Trump era and beforehand, but the Biden administration has not been applying them as stringently as its predecessor. And the other thing is for the U.S. to at least have the appearance of a credible military option, which it doesn't have today. Neither does Israel at this point, but both sides have to present a credible option. And the hope is that these two forms of pressure will produce some moderation on Iran's part, maybe in the form of delaying a potential breakout and maybe in encouraging them to come back to a deal at some point.
Now, you mentioned that the nuclear deal unlikely to happen. Where does it stand as of today? What is holding Iran and the United States and Europe back from signing a deal? What's the major obstacle today?
Well, I think what's happened at this point is that it's the Iranians who do not appear to want a deal. Most of the issues seem to have been worked out. And in the end, the Iranians came up with a last demand, which they may have raised actually because they thought it was a spoiler, the demand that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, or the Revolutionary Guards for short, that they be removed from the American terrorist list. And I think the administration was probably even willing to accept that at one point, if they had thought that that was really the last obstacle. But when they found out that this was probably a ploy on Iran's part and that they didn't really want to lead to a deal, then the U.S. decided to stand firm on this. I think what we've seen is the change in Iran, in the government, the rise of the Raisi government, a very, very hardline government. And what's happened in the last year or so is that from a position where Iran was in really difficult straits because of the American sanctions, they've basically learned to live with them. They've developed what they call a resistance economy. In other words, they're producing a lot of what they can't import anymore on their own. It's not as good, but they have knockoff products. China has stepped up to the plate to a certain extent, replacing trade with the rest of the outside world. And the Iranian economy, especially because of the rise in oil prices, isn't doing that badly at the moment. So I think that they believe that they can withstand American pressure for a long time, and they don't want to go back to the old deal. They probably won't want to go back to or go to a new and what we would consider better deal.
Now, you talked about Plan B. Israel engaging in a major military drill same day as the White House puts out the statement. I mean, is there any relation? Is this supposed to send a message to Iran that we're ready with Plan B?
Well, it would be nice if we could send that message, but I think the truth is that everybody knows we're not ready. The U.S. does not have a credible military option at this point. That's not to say that the U.S. couldn't develop one rather quickly if it wanted to, but it doesn't, and it's been a long time, probably close to a decade since the U.S. had a credible military option. Now, from all the public reports we know, including, for example, public statements just a few months ago by former Prime Minister Barak and former Prime Minister Olmert separately. They each came out with a statement saying that Israel does not have the military capability to do more than achieve a short-term delay in the Iranian program. And I think that's pretty much the majority view of all observers. So when we talk about Plan B, it's really a variety of things. It's first of all, renewing viable military options. And by the way, that's problematic to begin with, because even if you have the option, what can you really achieve? The Iranians already have the know-how. So even if you can totally destroy the program, they can reconstitute it rather quickly, a couple of years. But rebuilding the military options, it's covert operations, and there are constant reports in the press about various cyber and mostly kinetic attacks attributed to Israel. It's about building the relationship with the Sunni states, mostly the Gulf states that Israel is doing today, together with the United States. And that may be one of the primary issues that is being discussed in Washington today in preparation for President Biden's upcoming visit. It's about reinstating the sanctions. It's about putting together a package of sources of pressure that in the end are designed to try and get Iran to agree to a stronger and longer deal. And good luck to all of us.
Good luck to all of us indeed. Professor Chuck Freilich, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
And moving on, the Jerusalem Pride Parade taking place this evening in Jerusalem amid high tensions and threats. The Israel police on high alert all week for fear of attacks against the participants. Joining us now with more is ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan. So, Asaf, this year, the atmosphere surrounding the parade is particularly explosive, right? So much so that the police even sought to instill facial recognition systems to locate potential suspects. What can you tell us about the threats and about the major efforts of the police?
First of all, Lida, it's always great to be here. And I would start with the fact that we're seeing threats coming out against the organizers and LGBTQ members of Knesset, pretty much calling out against them, saying that they will not allow the parade to walk through, and also via the Facebook page called Brothers of Ishai Shlisel, which actually is a reference to the killer of Shira Banaki back in 2015 in the Pride March parade back then in Jerusalem. They're also saying that we are expected to see the same fate for as Shira Banaki in case the march goes through.
And so what exactly are the police doing to protect the parade participants?
So besides the deployment of officers throughout the city and preparation of the route, the police has also requested the legal advisor to the government to also allow them to use facial recognition throughout the route. Now the fear is, and of course is justified, with the amount of people the police are expecting to come in, they won't be able to monitor everyone. So having those facial recognition software and cameras standing in the streets might help avoid any potential infraction and also identify any potential attackers. And by the way, throughout the day, the police already used that to identify also more than 100 suspects that are also coming forward and might be a potential danger to the march itself.
Now, one suspect, I understand, was already arrested by the police ahead of the parade. What can you tell us?
We're talking about a 21-year-old guy living in South Jerusalem. He's someone with a European nationality. He's been living in the south side of the city for many years. And from what we know over and all, he was the one behind the page, of course, the Shlisel brother, and saying that now that the police is bringing him forward to the courts to pretty much extend his arrest.
And what are the police doing in terms of protecting the participants of the parade?
So the police themselves, I think it's very similar in some level to what we've seen on Sunday with the flag march. We see a lot of preparation, deployment throughout the city, early recon, of course, done by the police in different locations, and any potential friction points, especially those close to the more ultra-extremist Hasidic neighborhoods that probably from those areas are expecting more of the violence to come. But over and all, the preparation is, again, as much as possible to prevent any potential attack.
Asaf Nissan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much.
And now in other news, a delegation of ambassadors to the United Nations concluded a week-long visit to Israel. On their last day here, ILTV caught up with them as they learned all about what makes Israel the startup nation. Let's take a look. A delegation of ambassadors to the United Nations from 11 countries concluded a week-long visit to Israel with a professional review of Israeli innovation. The delegation, which included ambassadors to the United Nations from Benin, Burundi, Czech Republic, El Salvador, Estonia, Kazakhstan, Malawi, Panama, Poland, United Republic of Tanzania, and Uzbekistan participated in a tour hosted by Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan.
I have to say it's been an amazing visit. And to think about, our job, then as an ambassador at the United Nations, dealing with all countries in the world, you need to understand issues. And of course, reading papers and so on, it doesn't help. You need to meet people. And this is exactly what it is about. To understand Israel, to understand the problems, to understand the achievements, both political, economic. Now we are here at the Startup Center. And these kinds of human contacts are crucial to our job, to our work, to understand the world that we are working with.
On their last day, they stopped by the Tel Aviv headquarters of Startup Nation Central, a nonprofit that promotes the Israeli innovation ecosystem around the world, to learn about how Israel is addressing the Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the United Nations.
This is my first time in Israel, and this trip has really enlightened me. It has opened my eyes to many opportunities like economic trade, and we have just visited this facility, and it's impressive there are many opportunities. And something that I'm very, very grateful is to know how different companies, some of them just beginning, they are incorporating the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 in different solutions in order to provide precisely and accomplish the 2030 agenda. So this is really important, and I'm very looking forward to continue this partnership with Israel.
During their visit, the diplomats received an in-depth review of Israeli technological innovation by Startup Nation Central's CEO, Avi Hasson, and viewed innovation demos by Israeli startup companies who showcased their technologies, emphasizing water and climate tech solutions towards achieving the UN's SDGs. Among the Israeli startups showcased included SG Tech, which specializes in zero-carbon sustainable farming, Biotic, which developed a fully biodegradable replacement for plastic, and EcoWave Power, which developed a technology to turn ocean and sea waves into clean electricity.
The goal of the event today is really to expose and showcase Israeli innovation. As economies move more towards innovation-based, technology-based, knowledge-based economies, there's a lot that Israel can share and can spread around, and we think that there is a lot of collaboration that we can generate. This is really at the core of what SNC does, which is connecting the Israeli innovation ecosystem with the world, and one of our pillars is innovation diplomacy, and really putting to use Israeli innovation to help countries address their challenges and their goals, and to achieve more growth and more economic prosperity.
And we end the show with news that today Israel said goodbye to Rabbi Uzial, one of the leading film and cultural figures in Israel, who passed away at the age of 86. Uzial was an integral part of Israeli culture. He was part of the classic television series Lul, together with Arik Einstein, and was a renowned director and actor who played in dozens of classic Israeli films. He is best known for the movies 3 Days and a Child, Every King a Bastard, and Peeping Toms. In the late 70s, he went through an upheaval in his personal life and began a process of religious transformation. Initially, he tried to combine the two worlds of religious and secular. But after a few years, he decided to entirely disconnect from the secular world and bid farewell to the Israeli cultural scene when he joined the Ol Sameach Yeshiva and became an influential rabbi. In recent years, he made a minor comeback with a documentary about his life. In Israel, fellow actors, directors, and the political and social echelon bade farewell to the Israeli icon, who represented the very essence of Israeli culture. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies expected overhead tonight with lows averaging of 17 degrees Celsius or 63 Fahrenheit. And tomorrow we can expect to see more clear and sunny skies with top temperatures climbing to 33 Celsius or 92 degrees Fahrenheit. And finally, Saturday, we see much of the same weather with temperatures reaching high 20s to mid-30s. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel and around the world, check out our website, ILTV.tv. You can also subscribe to our newsletter and join us on our streaming platform at ILTV+. You can catch that across all your devices. I'm Ladar Gavei-Lazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.
Stay informed with the latest Israel news, live programs, culture, kosher cooking, and more on ILTV+. Subscribe on any device now and get a free month trial. Go to www.iltv.tv, add ILTV Plus on Roku, or download ILTV Plus from the Apple or Android app stores.